I think the remake is better than Final Fantasy VII. Okay, hold on, give me some time to explain. I activate my spell card called Nuance. Hold on, give me a minute. Okay, so before we start off into my list of reasons why I prefer the remake, let's lay some groundwork. Remakes are inherently controversial because normally, in my experience, you get two different camps. One camp argues that the original should be preserved and not touched. The remake should be as faithful as possible, especially if the game itself is well loved for its story or gameplay. The other camp wants to see, for lack of a better word, modernizations. Changes that are made to the base game to make it not feel so dated. Take Spyro the Dragon and the Reignited trilogy. The camera controls were renovated because the genre of third-person platformers and collectathons has evolved over time, and giving the players full control of the camera would be a popular thing to do, because when you go back to the base game, especially if you're unfamiliar with that style, have been out of the scene for a little bit, it can be jarring and hard to control. So changes are made to invoke the feeling of the old game, but with a different spin on it, whether it be from content or actual mechanisms that you interact with the game with, like controls or camera. Final Fantasy VII is not only, in my opinion, one of the greatest games I've ever played, but also one of the most influential games that have ever been released. It helped revolutionize the genre and served as a gateway for more RPGs from Japan to break into Western markets. As such, it is naturally held in high regard and has developed a devout fan base of people who may not even like the rest of the Final Fantasy series, but they love Final Fantasy VII all the same. The original Final Fantasy VII is one of the games I point to as one of the biggest initiators of my shift from FPS games over to RPGs back in the day. By that I mean like 8 to 7 years ago. It was a game predicated, or even renowned for its fun, turn-based gameplay, paired with genius storytelling and pacing, that was defined by its twists and turns, producing some of the most iconic moments, characters, and locations in all of gaming. It's a behemoth of a game, where even though the art style and character models haven't aged as well as its pixel art predecessors, even though that's kind of, subjective, the quality of the game still holds up. I've only played the game within the last 8 or so years, and I instantly fell in love with it. And it's easy to see why this game had such a chokehold in the industry when it released. It was simply revolutionary. It was imaginative, thought-provoking, engaging, and it was paired with really fun gameplay that was filled with various minigames and moments of levity that broke up the pace between those turn-based sections. It had variety and kept players on their toes. Trying to remake that game would be an essentially Herculean task. Final Fantasy VII works so well because each component works with each other and holds it all up, and a break in pacing could potentially compromise the story, and any change in gameplay risked ripping the soul out of the experience. So when the remake was announced, and announced to be a series of games, not just one remake, it was met with excitement at the thought of more Final Fantasy VII, but also valid skepticism at the idea that the identity of the game could be dragged out to fill up multiple entries. How do you expand on this story without severely compromising its gameplay or pacing? It could easily have fallen into the camp of just another attempt to milk the franchise for any drop of money that could be gathered, and some people will still hold that position. And then we were told that the first game would be just the Midgar section, expanded to fill out a near 40-hour experience. The original Midgar section only took mere hours, while the game itself overall took 40. There's no way this wouldn't be padded out in a way that wouldn't weaken the pacing, right? Well, I was concerned about that as well, and then I played it, and the brilliance that was on display took me frankly off guard. It was ballsy, it took risks, and overall I think they not only succeeded but surpassed the original Midgar section. And that's an important distinction. I think the remake does the Midgar section far better than the original. But why? Let me explain. And in order to explain, I'm gonna need to spoil as to why, so full spoiler warning from here on out. But let's get into it. The big one for me is characterization. The camera, the more zoomed in perspective, the use of voice acting, the facial animations, and animations overall, the more detailed models, the use of cinematography, or different styles of cinematography. The game feels and looks like Final Fantasy VII, but with more tools in their belt that they're able to expertly convey thought and emotion from these character models. And because of these tools, they're able to slow things down and smell the roses. In the old style, they had to squeeze every animation and second out of those models to convey as much emotion as possible, with character models that were just few in polygons. and lacking in robust facial animations, so the pacing of the story overall was fundamentally different to account for the limitations of this industry and of the game at the time. Animations were exaggerated and they didn't dwell on much. They did whatever had to be done to convey emotion and natural engagement out of that style of game. And they succeeded. It's a brilliant game. However, with the remake, they were able to slow things down and go for a different approach. Let the characters in the scenes tell the story. Allow the voice acting to run its course and instill more personality into each and every character, where the original simply didn't have time for stuff like this. The pacing of the original, I would argue, was kind of needed, due to the style of game that it was. It still slowed down from time to time, and had plenty of character, but it was simply different styles of character. It was just a different kind of game. But the style of game that the remake is, it allows for more of those character-driven scenes, meant not necessarily to drive the plot forward, but to flesh out the cast as a whole, and make each character feel and act like a character. The older game had scenes like that too, but they were largely reserved for the main party, and there are fewer and far between than in the remake, which has them for dang near everyone. Take Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, for example. They were just kind of there in the original, not meant to really be much of characters on their own, but merely to flesh Avalanche out and make them seem like an actual cohesive group. Whereas in the remake, we had a whole section dedicated to just their characters and making them feel unique, and just as important as Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, and Barrett. Whether it was learning more about Jesse's backstory, while the rest of the crew got pizza we snuck in from the back and stole a keycard, or trying to beat Wedge's high score in darts. They're just little moments strewn throughout, whether than the main story and side quests or side content, that flesh the world and flesh this cast of characters out. There's so many moments in the game where they're just willing to stop and take their time and let the characters speak for themselves, for these relationship and dynamics to shine, and for Midgard to feel like the iconic location that it is. Are there sections that feel out of place and like they just were there to pad it out? Yeah, sure, absolutely. Ain't denying that. The game's not perfect by any means. I think the train graveyard bit, while cool, could have been shortened, and those train minigames are the bane of my existence. And while I like the side quest system overall, some of them were just kind of a drag. But on the whole, I absolutely adore what they did, not only with the characters, but also with Midgar. It felt large and expansive. The scene with the plate falling felt emotional. We saw the horror that it ensued, and we saw the pain it inflicted. And the way the game still had mystery and intrigue for people who had or had not played 7 was just brilliant in my opinion. I love the specters. They kept me on my toes and made me question everything, and I loved the ending. Having Sephiroth show up in Chapter 2 was mind-blowing, because we didn't see him for quite a long time in the base game. And it told veteran players immediately that this is going to be a different story. There's going to be changes. There are going to be differences here. Be on the lookout for them. This isn't the old Final Fantasy VII. We are doing our own thing here. And that runs the risk of losing the essence of what made the original so good, but they didn't lose that in my opinion. It was a different take on it for sure, but an interesting one all the same. And I think a large reason as to why it was so interesting is because of the characters and their methodology for conveying a story, and for populating its world with wacky Final Fantasy moments juxtaposed with these very emotional, traumatic moments these characters go through. You go from a scene like Cloud dancing at the Honeybee Inn, best edition by the way, to Tifa crying in Cloud's shoulders or arms near the end of the game. You can go from one extreme to the other, and that's a good indicator for me personally that the game isn't just one-dimensional, and is varying tones and ideas, willing to do its own thing, and it feels engaging all the same for that. But recontextualizing the entire remake as a do-over, a chance not to have the same fate as the original game, was brilliant in my opinion. And people have broke down this section. How there's a meta-interpretation, fourth wall shattering idea that the specters are actually the players of old, wanting the story to be the same. I think that stuff is cool when it's done effectively, and I think it was done effectively here. It left me off with wanting more, giving me a ton of questions. What the hell does the 7 seconds mean? There's so many different interpretations and ideas and theories about that one line alone. What's happening with Zack? What's going on? The characters were so fun and engaging, the story was so well paced in my opinion, that it hooked me all over again. Now I'm in this position where, yeah, we know the rest of the story of Final Fantasy VII, the base game, but when will major detours or changes take place in the next game? And this is where the cautiousness of my optimism comes into play. They need to nail the next 2 games. They need to nail the story, and they need to nail the ending. It needs to be Final Fantasy VII, but it still needs to be its own thing. At this point, I don't think just rehashing the story of Final Fantasy VII will be effective. They're clearly going for their own thing, and I feel like you need to lean into that idea. But I don't think having all these new events happen as an elaborate attempt just to save Aerith's life would be an effective use of what this story could really be. I'm fine with saving her or not saving her. I don't particularly care which way they go. My thing is, if you do end up saving her or killing her, all the same, it has to be meaningful to the plot and message overall, and not just utilized as a cheap emotional payoff on one of the most famous character deaths in video game history. So yes, if I'm looking specifically at the Midgar section of Final Fantasy VII, I prefer how the remake handled it. I prefer the way they told the story, how they injected personality and character into everyone and fleshed out the cast overall. I felt that Midgar felt far more like an actual city and a location than it did in the base game, or the original game. I love the combat. It has some places where they can improve on, sure, but it was enjoyable and each character felt unique, not only story-wise but also gameplay-wise, and I appreciated that. The game itself was gorgeous and Midgar felt alive. Wall Market was an entire location in of itself and it felt distinct and it felt unique. It had personality and charisma dripping, oozing from every pore. And the game wasn't afraid to take risks, and to try something new, and to tell a compelling story all the while. It won't be for everyone, and that's fine. There's so many potential pitfalls the story can fall for from here on out, especially involving characters like Aerith and Zack. And they need to be very careful about how they tread that story, because it can easily go south at a moment's notice. But for right now, I'm happy with the remake that we got. It's full of heart and character and fleshed out a section of Final Fantasy VII that felt like a glorified tutorial and made it its own entity. So I'm going to call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And hit the bell icon to be notified for when I upload in the future. And leave a comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions on Final Fantasy VII Remake, and whether or not you're looking forward to the next installment. Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. Stay safe with everybody. Have a great day. Go play some video games if you can. And as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.